Minister, it's very clear, despite the fact that it hasn't been actually publicly acknowledged by government, that Ireland voted for Saudi Arabia to be part of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And the question beggared belief with a lot of people giving their record on women's rights and human rights, and maybe the answer lies in the question in front of you. The massive spike in the licences issued in the report published by your department of arms exports in the period of 2015 and indeed the first 6 months of 2016 to the Saudi Arabian alliance, which has been clearly very much involved in the bombardment of Yemen. And I'm wondering what is going on in a neutral country, particularly when all of the weapons involved are in category ML5, which includes very serious stuff: bombing computers, gun-laying equipment, weapon control systems and so on.
The EU has a range of sanctions in place in respect of countries engaged in conflicts. All licence applications are considered having regard to these measures. Sanctions can include arms embargoes and various restrictive measures, including prohibitions on the provision of targeted goods and services. My department observes all arms embargoes and trade sanctions when considering export licence applications. There are no EU sanctions in place in respect of Saudi Arabia. All export licence applications, whether for dual use or military goods, are subject to rigorous scrutiny and are considered in the light of the spirit and the objectives of the 2008 EU Common Position on Arms Exports. My officials are in regular contact with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on export licensing issues. They consult with that department in respect of all military export licence applications, and my officials seek observations on any foreign policy concerns that may arise in respect of a proposed export. Such factors are subject to review in light of development in a given region. Any observations which may arise from this examination are considered in the final assessment of any licence application. My department may refuse an export licence following consultation with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and other EU and non-EU export licensing authorities as appropriate. As indicated in the annual report, my department issued one military export licence with Saudi Arabia as the ultimate end user. This was in 2015 in respect of category ML5 military products, which includes electronic control devices and components.
Thank you.
Question last time round, Minister, except of course for the 1,200 dead Yemeni children, the tens of thousands injured and the 4 million suffering from acute malnutrition. What I asked you about was the EU Common Position on Arms Exports, which says the sale of arms to a country, if there is a risk that the military technology or equipment to be exported might be used in the commission of serious violations of international human law. Now, we know that the British Parliament, for example, on a cross-party basis, has recommended the suspension of arms to Saudi Arabia because and until UN-led investigation into violations of human rights is concluded. The UK isn't even a neutral country. We are. We should be leading on these matters, particularly when it's also the case that it's said we should be careful about selling arms to countries who have links with terrorism. And we know from Hillary Clinton's emails, no less, that Saudi Arabia arms ISIS. It's utterly ridiculous that we continue to issue arms export licences to this country, which is involved in war crimes. It's simply not good enough. And I would ask you to deal with the issue of why, for example, I didn't ask you about no arms embargo, I don't want to hear about it, is why, for example, we would not, against that backdrop, institute a presumption of denial policy, which could be brought in overnight and put us to the forefront on these very, very important human rights issues.
Minister, 1 minute.
And Deputy, you mentioned export licences. I said one military export licence for export, and we do not export arms. The key consideration in dealing with military export licences applications is to establish if there are concerns with the end user or the proposed end use. This process may include consultation, as I have outlined earlier. My department consults with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. In addition, end-user certificates are always required as a further control measure. End-user certificates provide information on the proposed transaction. They certify that the company will be the final recipient of the goods being exported and include an undertaking that the goods will not be used in connection with weapons of mass destruction. Individual licences are valid for the export of a specific quantity of goods to a specific end user within a 12-month period. A new application must be made for any exports above that provided for on the original export licence. All new and repeat licence applications are subject to the full export licensing scrutiny process. All licence applications are considered in the spirit and objectives of the 2008 EU Common Position on Arms Exports.
Final supplementary.
Do you presume, Minister, that it's a coincidence that we've gone from zero arms sales to Qatar and declining arms sales to the UAE to a significant uptake in both those figures in 2015? All of the arms exports to Saudi Arabia were all in the category of ML5. That category includes weapon sights, bombing computers, gun-laying equipment and weapon control systems. These are not incidental bits of hardware, if you like, and really the issue of the destination of final end use actually makes no difference to our obligations under the EU Common Position, which says if there's a risk of this military technology or equipment being used in the violation of human rights, then they should not be exported. And that's the question that's been asked. It doesn't really matter if the weapons components stop off in another country on their way to Qatar. Our obligations in that instance are the same. And I would ask you, Minister, to look at the issue of a presumption of denial within the department, whereby even as an interim measure we could take the step, it could be instituted overnight, that if anybody from these countries applied for a licence to export arms to Saudi Arabia, they could be refused. And you haven't dealt with that, and I really would ask you, we're talking about lives, war crimes and a violation of human rights.
Final response.
Oh, yeah, I beg your pardon. Yeah, Deputy, the information I have in front of me is one military export with Saudi Arabia as the final end-user destination. These were not for production of arms. Sometimes they are components for helicopters, jeeps, and I don't think you can jump to the conclusion that we are exporting arms or we're exporting components for arms. I don't think you can do that at all, because our department and the Department of Foreign Affairs take an extreme view, and we make sure that the applicants are denied if there is any questions to be asked in that instance.